In this video, we're going to take a look at the Movo X3 shotgun microphone. It can be powered by traditional phantom power and a AA battery, just like the MKE600 from Sennheiser, but it does it at less than half the price. Now before we dive in, I want to mention that Movo sent me the X3 microphone for the purpose of reviewing it. I was not paid to make this video, and Movo has no input on my review. I do have an Amazon affiliate link down in the description for you if you're interested in picking up the X3 and you'd like to support this channel. No matter what type of content you create, improving the audio quality is one of the best things that you can do. But professional microphones are not known for being very budget friendly. So if you haven't started making money from your content yet, then spending, several $100s on a microphone can definitely be a stretch. And microphones like the Sennheiser MKE600 have made that a little bit more attainable. But still, at a price around $300, it's still not what I would call super budget friendly. Well, enter the X3 from Movo. It offers basically the same features as the MKE600, but for only $129. These microphones allow you to take a step towards more professional audio without requiring you to have a field recorder or audio interface, at least at first, because you can power them with a AA battery and then run the audio directly into your camera with the provided cables. All right, we've got a lot of audio samples to get to, so let's dive in here. I'm recording both the X3 and the MKE600 into the Zoom F3 field recorder at 32-bit depth, 48 kilohertz. We're recording both at the same time so that I can just switch back and forth between them. I've already been switching back and forth between them so that you can pick up on the differences in how they sound. All the audio is going to be normalized to -16 LUFS, and I will use a limiter to make sure I don't have any clipping, but I'm not going to be applying any other post-processing, so there's no EQ, there's no noise reduction, there's no compression applied to any of the audio in the video. When it comes to the basic specifications, for the X3, the frequency response is 60 Hz to 20 kilohertz, the sensitivity is -36 dBV, and the self-noise is not stated in any documentation that I've seen or that I could find online. So we will be doing a practical noise test later, but I don't know the actual self-noise itself. The high-pass filter switch on the X3 starts at 150 Hz. Now for the MKE600, the frequency response is 40 Hz to 20 kilohertz, and the sensitivity is -33 dBV, so just a touch more sensitive. The self-noise is 15 dBA over the 48 volts of phantom power and 16 dBA on battery power. The high-pass filter switch on the MKE600 starts at 100 Hz, so a little bit lower than the 150 Hz on the X3. Now the MKE600 comes with a basic mount, a foam windscreen, and an XLR to 3.5mm adapter. However, it's not very long. This is not going to be long enough to do anything other than really camera mount the MKE600, so you won't be able to really properly position it on a boom, which is necessary to get the best sound if your camera is more than just a foot or two away. The X3, on the other hand, comes with a few more things. Not only does it come with a foam windscreen, which is good enough for very, very mild amounts of breeze, but it also comes with a dead cat or wind muff, which you slip over the foam windscreen, which will block actual wind. It also comes with a handle for hand holding it. It comes with this little flexible mount, as well as a 3/8 to 1/4 inch thread adapter. They both also come with a soft zipper case. Now, not in front of me right now are the cables that come with the X3. The X3 also comes with an XLR to 3.5mm cable. However, it is much longer than the one that comes with the MKE600, so you can actually properly position it on a boom and run it into your camera. It also comes with a standard XLR to XLR cable. So the X3 does come with some additional accessories you don't get with the MKE600, making it a pretty good value, especially considering the price point is less than half of the MKE600. Before we switch over to the 3.5mm output, let's do a quick off-axis test for both of them. So right now I'm facing towards the X3 and right in the middle of its polar pattern, and if I move off-axis to one side, here's what that sounds like. Now I am back at the center of the X3, and if I move off-axis to the other side, here's what that sounds like. Now I'm talking straight into the polar pattern of the MKE600. Here's what that sounds like. I'll move off-axis on this side, and that's what this sounds like. Back to the center, and then off to the other side for the MKE600. Here's how that sounds. All right, here's a sample of the audio from the X3 using the battery power and the XLR to 3.5mm adapter cable running straight into the camera. You're listening for two things here. First, how much has the background noise level changed? Is there more hiss or white noise than before when we were using the XLR output into the Zoom F3? I'm running this into the Panasonic S5 II. It is set to the standard gain and the level is at -10 dB. The second thing you're listening for is whether the frequency response of the microphone is different on battery power versus phantom power. Hold that thought because we're going to try this in a different camera in just a moment. But before we do that, here is a comparison sample of the MKE600 also running over the 3.5mm output with battery power into the S5 II. Now, I have this in the same position as before, and I'm actually using the cable that came with the X3 for this because I wanted this to be a fair comparison and keep it in the same position instead of having to camera mount it. Let me know down in the comments, what do you hear in terms of a background or white noise comparison over the battery power for these two mics? Okay, now this is the X3 running over the battery power 3.5mm output using the provided cable running into the Sony FX30. So this is a different camera, and I currently have the input level set to a 14. The reason we're doing this is because you're probably going to notice a different sounding result here running into the FX30 compared to running into the S5 II. So different camera manufacturer, different internal preamp, different sounding result. And now this is the Sennheiser MKE600 running into the Sony FX30, and again we're using the cable that came with the Movo X3 to get it positioned, and I was able to turn the FX30 input level down to 12, so just a little bit lower than the X3. Now we're going to test the high pass filter of the X3. That really annoying sound you hear is a 50 Hertz hum. It is a tone generator that I'm running, so it's exactly 50 Hertz, so it's not quite a natural sound like a train or an airplane or a bus. But what we're going to do is see how much of that 50 Hertz sound the high pass filter on the X3 can cut out. And now the high pass filter on the X3 is engaged. Now this is just a single switch on the X3. The first position is just turning it on for the battery power, and then the second position is engaging that high pass filter. And now the high pass filter is turned back off, so you should hear that annoying 50 Hertz hum, but the low end should have also come back in my voice. And now we're going to test out the high pass filter of the MKE600. We are running on battery power directly into the S5 II. And now the high pass filter is turned on the MKE600. It should be doing a decent job of cutting out that 50 Hertz hum. And now we're back to the high pass filter off. Now here's a sample of the X3 outdoors with the dead cat or wind muff installed as well as the foam. The dead cat just goes over the foam, and I've got an aftermarket or third-party dead cat installed on the MKE600 as well. There's a little bit of a breeze out here, so this is a fair test for what you can expect from the wind muff that comes with the X3. I'm recording this using 48 volts of phantom power, again into the Zoom F3, recording in 32-bit at 48 kilohertz. Now neither the MKE600 or the X3 has a presence boost, so you can't turn up the higher frequencies, kind of put a high shelf on there to sort of compensate for the dense wind muffs that can cut away some of those high frequencies. So you would have to do that in post if you find that this sounds a little bit muffled or you want to boost the high end a little bit. Now right now my Sony FX30 is set to a 35mm full frame equivalent focal length, and both microphones are mounted on top of the camera. I'm using a stereo bar to mount them next to each other on top of the camera. At this focal length, working this close to the camera, this would not be a problem. You would get pretty good focused audio on you or your subject if you can work at this distance. However, if you were working with, say, a 50mm lens, which now we are at the 50mm equivalent focal length on the FX30, that would mean you would need to stand further back from your camera at the distance I am now. And so this is not way further back from the camera, but if this is more the type of shot you were going for, if you only had a 50mm lens to work with, now you're going to start to hear a little bit more of the ambient sound of the environment. And if there's traffic, cars, there are cars off in the distance. So we're getting into the range now where camera mounting is not ideal. And now we're back at the 35mm equivalent focal length, so you should hear just a little bit less of that background noise once the audio is normalized. Now, one other thing we're going to test while we're out here is whether the high pass filters on these microphones work while they are being powered by 48 volts of phantom power. I know that the high pass filters work on both of these microphones over the battery power. However, I want to see if the high pass filter will also engage when they are not using their own battery power and instead are receiving phantom power. And now the high pass filter is turned on both microphones. Now, there is a difference between these two because the X3 has a single switch on the body. Now, the MKE600 has two separate switches. One is for the high pass filter and one is for the battery power. So I'm assuming the high pass filter has been engaged on the MKE600 since it is a separate switch. And now we're back to the high pass filter turned off on both microphones. Let me know down in the comments, what did you hear in terms of a sound difference for both of them, and did it work at all for the X3, or is it only going to work on battery power? Now here's a quick sample running the X3 using the 3.5mm output into an extra little adapter straight into my iPhone 15 Pro Max. I'm recording this with the Blackmagic camera app. It still doesn't sound great though, and the level is pretty low, so I think when I normalize it in post, there's probably going to be a pretty good amount of white noise here. I don't really recommend doing this though. This is just not the best choice if you primarily record with a smartphone or tablet or computer. And lastly, we're going to test out the noise levels on these microphones to see how they compare and how they sound in the environment. Now, the way we're going to test this out is something I've borrowed from Curtis Judd. Fantastic YouTube channel, by the way, and he has years of audio industry experience, so go check out his channel if you haven't. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna record some dialogue, just a short segment of dialogue here in my normal recording space, and then I'm gonna record a few seconds of silence after that. I will then take those audio files and normalize just the dialogue portion to -16 LUFS. Now using Isotope RX10, we'll take a look here at the silent portion of the recording for both of them, and what I'm finding is that the average RMS level for the X3 is coming out around -59 dB, and the same for the MKE600 is coming out around -57 dB. So they are very close. They're within sort of margin of error of each other there. And really it's the comparison that we care about. It's not so much the measurement, because this is not super scientific. This is measuring both the ambient sound level in the room as well as the self noise of the microphones. So it's not really a measure of just the self noise, but it is a practical measure of how much the noise floor is going to be present. And in my comparison, the X3 is pretty much on par with, potentially even very slightly better than the MKE600 when it comes to noise. Now, before we jump into pros and cons, I want to mention that the combination here of the foam windscreen and the wind muff that come with the X3, these two together are more dense than the third-party wind muff or dead cat that I have bought separately for the MKE600. So that is why the MKE600 sounds like it has a lot more clarity and the X3 sounded muffled. I just wanted to point that out. I didn't want you to think that the MKE600 was that much better. All right, now let's talk about pros and cons for the X3 and then my overall recommendation here. In terms of pros, I think what you get for the price is definitely a good value. You're getting everything you need to record. Just take it out of the box, plug it into your camera if you don't have a field recorder or audio interface, and you can record. The same thing can't be said for the MKE600. It's more than double the price, and it also doesn't come with everything that you need. It doesn't come with an XLR to XLR cable. The 3.5mm output is too short to actually properly position it on a boom. It also doesn't come with one of these if you're going to be recording outdoors and you want to protect against the wind. So you will have to buy some additional things, even if you're going to run the audio into your camera. The X3, you've got everything you need. Another pro is that the sound over the phantom power for the X3 I think is very usable. Does it sound quite as good in a general sense compared to the MKE600? No, I don't think it does. It's fairly comparable. I hear a little bit of a difference there in the low mids. I have a lot of low mids in my voice, and I think the X3 might overemphasize them a little bit more. And for the 3.5mm output, it sounds good with some cameras. There is a big con, in my opinion, with this that I'll get to in just a moment. But on the pro side of things for the 3.5mm output, if your camera's audio input works and sounds like the Panasonic Lumix S5 II or S5 IIX, it actually sounds very usable to me over the 3.5mm connection with certain cameras. And I have mentioned this before, but another pro would be they give you an XLR to 3.5mm cable. It's actually long enough to properly position it. All right, now let's talk about some cons. And for me, the biggest one here is the inconsistency of the 3.5mm output with battery power. As you heard in the samples, it sounded very usable. However, as soon as I plugged it into any of my Sony cameras, including the FX30, and I also tested it separately with the ZV-E1, and it just did not sound great at all. It sounded very thin and tinny. You know, maybe the Sony cameras have a different impedance on their microphone inputs, so that inconsistency is a big con for me. You're not gonna know whether it's gonna sound great in your camera or not before you buy it. Now, another con that would be specific to your use case, but this is not a knock on the X3 specifically, because this would apply to the MKE600 as well. If you record a lot with smartphones, or if you record audio into a tablet or a computer a lot and you're looking for a microphone that can kind of do a little bit of everything for you, these are not a great choice in my opinion, neither one of them. And that's because the output on battery power is to a 3.5mm TRS connection. And when I tested it with my iPhone 15 Pro Max, trying to get the audio into an actual digital device, your options are kind of limited and none of them sound that great. Okay, so with the pros and cons in mind there, what would I do? What are my recommendations? Well, I do think the X3 is a viable option for the price in the right recording scenario. If you're gonna be recording outdoors or in treated spaces and you're looking for, a shotgun mic to do some interviews or talking heads, something like that, it's not a bad choice, especially if you have some type of audio interface or field recorder where you can just use it over phantom power. But if that's the case, then you don't need to limit yourself to the X3 with the battery power, because there's lots of other XLR only microphones on the market. In comparison to the MKE600, I would say it does provide most of what you're getting with the MKE600 at less than half the price. So did the MKE600 sound more than twice as good as the X3, I guess, is the question. So who would I not recommend the X3 for? Well, there's really two scenarios here that I would not recommend it, but I also wouldn't recommend the MKE600. First of all, if you do a lot of your recording with digital devices that have a USB input and you really don't have any desire to work with XLR, if you just want to use either a 3.5mm input or maybe USB, then I would not recommend these. I would recommend looking at options like the Rode VideoMic Go 2, the Rode VideoMic NTG, or the Deity VMic D4. Those all have 3.5mm and USB outputs, so if you're recording with a smartphone one day, you can just plug it directly into your smartphone, and then you can use it with your camera with the 3.5mm output. So those offer better multi-purpose flexibility if you do a lot of recording with 3.5mm and USB, but you just don't really intend on getting into XLR devices. And the second situation where I wouldn't recommend either the X3 or the MKE600 would be if you're recording exclusively indoors in untreated spaces. If you don't have control over the space you're going to be recording in, or if you do have control, but you're not gonna be really doing sound treatment to it, these are just not that great of a choice, because there is the potential that you could run into that nasty comb filtering, warbly sound. It doesn't always happen, but if it does, you can't remove it in post. It's really hard to do anything in post if you do get that issue. So what I would recommend instead in that scenario would actually be potentially one of those video mics that I mentioned earlier, because they don't quite suffer from that as bad. They're shorter, more compact, almost like my other recommendation, which would be a small diaphragm condenser microphone. Now, small diaphragm condenser mics like this one here, the Behringer B5, are gonna be XLR only, so you're gonna need a recorder or audio interface, but you can get a pretty decent audio interface like the one I'm using right now, the M Audio M-Track Solo, for only $50. Now the B5 is $79 new, so this setup is exactly $129, the same price as the X3. Now you position a mic like this on a boom just out of frame like a shotgun mic, but just a little bit closer than you would with a shotgun mic, because this has a cardioid pattern, which is a little bit of a wider pattern than shotgun microphones. In an indoor space without a lot of sound treatment, you're not gonna have any of the potential issues that you can have with a standard shotgun mic. So this won't suffer from that weird phasey comb filtering sound even in totally untreated spaces. Now it also doesn't magically make bad sounding spaces sound great. It just doesn't run into that strange issue that cannot be fixed in post. Cover up as many hard surfaces as you can, use a microphone like this, and you're gonna actually capture great sound for a very affordable price. And the bonus is now you have an audio interface, so you can run this audio not only into your camera, like I am, using a $7 RCA to 3.5mm cable, but you can also record it digitally into a computer, smartphone, or tablet. All right, so that'll do it for this video. Let me know what you think of the sound of the X3 compared to the MKE600. Let me know if you think it is the better value or if the MKE600 is still the way to go. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi-Pro Tech and Gear channel, and while you're here, why don't you go ahead and watch this video up here? I'm sure you'll like it. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.